Interpretation of Bharani Nakshatra. When the moon is placed in Bharani Nakshatra and supported by benefics, it fosters deep emotional capacity, fierce loyalty, and transformative nurturing. Bharani, ruled by Venus, carries the Shakti of Bharani, the power to carry things away, suggesting intense emotional experiences and the ability to endure psychological upheaval. A benefic moon here produces intense emotional commitment, especially in caregiving or artistic pursuits. However, when afflicted by malefics like Rahu or Saturn, the moon's emotional intensity may manifest as possessiveness, suppressed grief, or inability to let go of past attachments. Venus in Bharani enhances sensuality, aesthetic power, and a strong affinity for beauty and indulgence. Since Venus rules this nakshatra, it becomes extremely potent here, especially when supported by Jupiter or placed in a trinal or angular house. The native expresses creativity through luxury, fertility, or eroticism. But when Venus is afflicted, say by Saturn in conjunction or by Rahu's distortion, it may result in addiction to pleasures, vanity, or emotional entrapment in toxic love dynamics. Jupiter placed in Bharani offers philosophical insight into life's deeper transitions. A benefic Jupiter here creates natural healers, guides, or dharmic educators who are not afraid to dive into the taboo. This placement blesses the native with moral fortitude when Jupiter is dignified. However, when Jupiter is placed in the 6th, 8th, or 12th house or is conjoined with Ketu or Saturn, Bharani's power to transform may backfire as religious rigidity, misapplied ethics, or unfulfilled spiritual ideals. Mars in Bharani charges the native with passionate will and intensity. As a natural malefic, Mars may either empower or damage depending on house placement. In Kendras or Konas, Mars lends sexual magnetism and bold artistic risk-taking. However, in dusthanas or under malefic aspects, Mars in Bharani may trigger destructive impulses, sexual obsession, or aggression masked under beauty and charm. When Mars rules the 1st or 10th house and is placed here, it generates intense self-expression through career or physicality. Saturn's presence in Bharani often leads to karmic challenges around attachment, control, and emotional burden. As a natural malefic in a Venus-ruled nakshatra, Saturn can restrict the free flow of pleasure or delay emotional fulfillment. However, when placed in the 1st, 4th, 7th, or 10th houses and aspected by benefics, Saturn grants disciplined creative power, structured transformation, and the ability to lead others through difficult transitions. Afflictions push the native into prolonged suffering through personal sacrifice. Rahu in Bharani amplifies sensuality, rebellion, and the desire to break traditional moral constraints. While Bharani's energy supports transformation, Rahu distorts it into uncontrolled desire or karmic entanglements in relationships. When placed in Kona or Kendra and supported by Venus or Jupiter, Rahu in Bharani can make one a revolutionary artist or taboo breaker. But in houses like the 6th or 8th and influenced by malefics, Rahu may lead to scandal, abuse of sexual power, or destructive relationships. Ketu in Bharani brings a disinterest in worldly pleasures even while being surrounded by them. It adds spiritual detachment to Venus's worldly domain. If well placed in angular or trinal houses, Ketu here supports tantric practices, emotional wisdom, or karmic release from sexual material dependency. If afflicted or in the 8th or 12th, it may manifest as emotional numbness, psychological withdrawal, or intense past life residues related to control and loss. Mercury in Bharani depends greatly on conjunction. When supported by Venus or Jupiter, Mercury produces gifted communicators in the arts, especially poets, musicians, or writers who explore themes of death, birth, and pleasure. When under Rahu or Mars influence, Mercury may become manipulative, sexually provocative, or mentally volatile. A well-placed Mercury in Bharani in 5th or 9th house fosters expressive intelligence linked to sensual or taboo subjects. Interpretation of Bharani Nakshatra, house placement context. When Venus, the ruler of Bharani Nakshatra, is placed in a Kendra or Kona, its power of nurturing, attraction, and transformative creation flourishes. For instance, for a Capricorn ascendant, if Venus rules the 5th and 10th houses and is placed in the 1st house, a Kendra, and Moon is in Bharani, the native embodies magnetic presence and creative leadership. Bharani's Shakti finds an empowered vessel for visibility, love, and impactful beginnings, especially in professions related to beauty, media, or healing. If the lord of the Bharani placed planet is situated in a Kona, say Jupiter rules the 9th and 12th houses for Scorpio ascendant, and is placed in the 5th house, and Jupiter itself occupies Bharani, this connects the power of transformation with higher values, creativity, and children. This is a potent placement for someone engaging in spiritual education, arts, or philosophical healing modalities. Venusian energy in a Kona house expresses with flair and depth, initiating dharmic creation from Bharani's deep emotional womb. When Bharani-linked planets or their lords fall into Dushtana houses, 6th, 8th, or 12th, the nakshatra's energy becomes distorted or tested. For instance, if Venus is in Bharani for a Gemini ascendant, and Venus rules 5th and 12th houses, and it's placed in the 8th, the native may undergo intense karmic purging related to love, sexuality, or self-worth. Though Bharani can endure crisis, in Dashtanas the struggle is internalized, often surfacing as sexual trauma, betrayal in romance, or hidden creative frustration. Suppose Saturn is placed in Bharani and rules 6th and 7th houses for Leo ascendant, and Saturn is placed in the 12th house. Bharani's transformative energy gets channeled through sacrifice, isolation, or karmic delays in relationships. Here, relationships might involve heavy emotional responsibilities or separative tendencies. Though this setup may eventually foster spiritual maturity, early life may be marked by unresolved emotional debts or chronic patterns of emotional self-denial. When Mars, ruler of the Aries sign housing Bharani, occupies the 10th house, say, for Cancer ascendant, and Venus is in Bharani, this brings transformative creative passion to the career. The 10th house empowers Bharani's impulses, especially when the planetary lord supports leadership. The native may be involved in medicine, transformation industries, fashion, or even intense political reform. Bharani here becomes a channel for revolution through beauty, impact, or social justice. Now consider Mercury in Bharani for a Taurus ascendant, ruling the 2nd and 5th houses but placed in the 6th. This dims Bharani's expressive power through conflict, anxiety, or competition. Speech and communication may carry an edge of provocation or manipulation. The native may experience difficulties balancing desire and duty, particularly around finances and romantic expectations, due to 6th house's nature to create imbalance and struggle in Venusian domains. If Rahu is placed in Bharani and the lord of Bharani, Venus, is placed in a Kona, like the 9th house for Virgo ascendant, the native may become a passionate, magnetic reformer in spiritual or philosophical arenas. This placement channels Rahu's obsession into the pursuit of taboo-breaking truths and transformation through higher learning. The 9th house, as Kona dignifies Bharani's fire, and with Venus supporting Dharma, the person gains fame through unconventional teachings or lifestyle. Lastly, Ketu in Bharani for Aries ascendant, with Venus placed in the 8th house, can manifest intense karmic patterns around detachment from pleasure, suppressed sexual expression, or loss of control in intimate relationships. The native may have to face subconscious fears linked to death, trust, and control. However, if Venus were placed in the 5th or 1st house instead, the Bharani energy would manifest more harmoniously, creating a poised yet emotionally potent personality capable of handling transitions with wisdom and grace. Interpretation of Purva Ashada Nakshatra. When the moon is placed in Purva Ashada Nakshatra and supported by benefics like Jupiter or Venus, it gives an emotionally assertive, idealistic, and truth-driven nature. Ruled by Venus and symbolized by the winnowing basket, this nakshatra represents purification, victory, and unwavering faith in one's ideals. A benefic moon here brings emotional optimism, eloquence, and a desire to stand for moral or aesthetic truths. However, when afflicted, especially by Saturn, Rahu, or Mars, the moon may show emotional arrogance, intellectual stubbornness, or blind belief in a singular narrative, often leading to disappointment in close relationships. Venus in Purva Ashada shines as a champion of beauty, conviction, and emotional expressiveness. When well placed in a Kendra or Kona and supported by Jupiter or Mercury, Venus becomes a diplomatic yet unyielding force, someone who wins hearts through principled affection and magnetic creativity. However, when afflicted, Venus here can become overly defensive in love, idealistic to a fault, or involved in emotionally dramatic battles for validation, especially in partnerships or artistic identity. Jupiter in Purva Ashada grants high-minded wisdom, spiritual insight, and persuasive teaching abilities. The native may feel called to uphold a vision of truth, justice, or ethical victory. When strong, this Jupiter creates visionary leaders, educators, or preachers who rally others through conviction. If afflicted, especially by Rahu or Saturn, this placement may lead to moral superiority, emotional rigidity, or preaching without practice, often masking emotional vulnerability behind intellectual certainty. Mars in Purva Ashada ignites the warrior for truth. The native has a strong urge to defend ideals, challenge dishonesty, and act with integrity. When well placed, this gives courageous social reformers, idealistic entrepreneurs, or emotionally intense competitors. However, when afflicted, Mars may cause overzealousness, emotional outbursts over principles, or unnecessary confrontation driven by ego rather than clarity. Saturn in Purva Ashada builds a patient champion, someone who protects ideals through consistent labor and silent conviction. When supported, Saturn here produces slow but sure builders of movements, educators, or lawmakers with deep inner faith. But when afflicted, Saturn may turn emotionally cold, pessimistic, or trapped in long-term struggles to prove moral worth, often fighting invisible battles no one sees. Rahu in Purva Ashada can exaggerate the desire to appear victorious, morally superior, or emotionally unshakable. When aligned with Venus or Jupiter, this gives influential speakers, social justice figures, or trendsetters who guide collective emotion. If afflicted, however, Rahu may bring emotional hypocrisy, a savior complex, or identity confusion hidden behind rhetorical strength. Ketu in Purva Ashada internalizes the urge for victory, often bringing quiet emotional detachment from ideals that once seemed important. This can manifest as ascetic teachers, emotionally withdrawn scholars, or deeply spiritual individuals uninterested in public validation. If afflicted, Ketu here may cause emotional stagnation, distrust in emotional expression, or detachment from personal relationships due to past wounds tied to ideological failure. Mercury in Purva Ashada merges intellect with conviction. The native becomes a skilled debater, communicator, or moral persuader. When well placed, this Mercury fosters literary talent, activism, or social commentary. When afflicted, especially by Rahu or Mars, it may lead to argumentative speech, emotional defensiveness in conversation, or logical manipulation of truth to suit personal agendas. Interpretation of Purva Ashada Nakshatra, house placement context. When Venus, the ruler of Purva Ashada Nakshatra, is placed in a Kendra, 1st, 4th, 7th, 10th, or Kona, 1st, 5th, 9th, the nakshatra's core qualities of idealism, emotional conviction, and principled beauty flourish through visible success and purposeful alignment. For Sagittarius ascendant, if Venus rules the 6th and 11th houses and is placed in the 10th house, and the moon is in Purva Ashada, the native becomes a highly persuasive public figure, driven to purify and elevate systems or social norms. Their emotional presence is fueled by conviction and the will to reform through graceful command. If Jupiter is in Purva Ashada and rules the 1st and 4th houses, for Pisces ascendant, and is placed in the 5th house, Kona, the native gains emotional nobility, moral clarity, and visionary leadership. Purva Ashada's victory symbolism merges with Jupiter's Dharma, enabling the native to channel emotional depth into teaching, creative output, or ideological reform. This also supports righteous love, deeply bonded parenting, or a legacy of integrity through intellect and heart. When a planet placed in Purva Ashada has its ruler in a Dushtana house, 6th, 8th, or 12th, the nakshatra's drive for truth and purification may undergo emotional tension, karmic trials, or painful purification. For example, if Mars is in Purva Ashada and rules the 3rd and 8th houses, for Virgo ascendant, and is placed in the 6th house, the native may deal with internalized conflict, health issues due to emotional stubbornness, or public arguments over principle. However, if supported, this placement builds mental resilience and leadership in crisis negotiation or reformative justice. Now consider Mercury in Purva Ashada for Gemini ascendant, ruling the 1st and 4th houses, and placed in the 9th house, Kona. The native becomes a vocal idealist, someone whose speech blends emotion and intellect in service of higher values. They may write, teach, or advocate for causes, often pushing against outdated norms. If Mercury is afflicted, however, their communication may become dogmatic, overly righteous, or emotionally tone-deaf despite good intent. If Saturn is in Purva Ashada and rules the 8th and 9th houses for Aquarius ascendant and is placed in the first house, the native may express quiet emotional strength and endurance, often battling internal doubts while publicly maintaining discipline and moral dignity. When supported, this gives a karmic reformer who upholds justice with patience. When afflicted, Saturn here may lead to suppressed passion, fear of emotional intimacy, or reluctance to let go of failed ideals. Suppose Rahu is in Purva Ashada and Venus is placed in the 12th house for Leo ascendant. The native may be drawn toward foreign lands, spiritual victory, or emotional escape through art, sacrifice, or retreat. Rahu amplifies the drive to win emotionally or socially, while Venus in the 12th filters this through private passion, imagination, or hidden relationship patterns. If afflicted, this combination may lead to escapism, emotional idealization, or romantic losses that force inner growth. If Ketu is in Purva Ashada and Venus is in the 6th house for Aries ascendant, the native may subconsciously resist emotional entanglement, feeling that love or beauty has caused pain in the past. This placement often leads to service-oriented detachment, where emotion is refined through humility, caregiving, or moral challenges. If Venus is afflicted, the native may struggle with codependency, emotional exhaustion, or the fear of repeating karmic romantic patterns. Finally, if the moon is in Purva Ashada for Libra ascendant and rules the 10th house, placed in the 3rd house, the native becomes a confident communicator who emotionally identifies with victory through speech, writing, or performance. The drive to share ideals becomes central to emotional fulfillment. If the moon is strong, this gives a persuasive leader in media or public discourse. If afflicted, however, there may be reactive speech patterns, emotional rigidity in communication, or inner pressure to always appear right. Interpretation of Purva Phalguni Nakshatra. When the moon is placed in Purva Phalguni Nakshatra and supported by benefics like Venus or Jupiter, it creates a personality rich in charm, creativity, and a strong sense of pleasure and self-worth. Ruled by Venus and symbolized by the front legs of a bed, this nakshatra governs comfort, romance, luxury, and creative rejuvenation. A benefic moon here makes the native emotionally expressive, sensually inclined, and relationship-focused. However, if afflicted by Saturn, Rahu, or Mars, the moon in Purva Phalguni may lead to indulgence, vanity, or dependency in relationships, masking emotional insecurity behind flamboyance or flirtation. Venus in Purva Phalguni thrives in its own nakshatra, expressing aesthetic, romantic, and artistic energies with vitality. When well placed in angular or trinal houses and supported by Jupiter or Mercury, Venus here produces performers, designers, or socially magnetic figures who radiate beauty and pleasure. However, when afflicted, especially by Mars or Rahu, this placement can result in self-indulgent behavior, over-reliance on beauty or charm, or romantic escapism that avoids deeper emotional engagement. Jupiter in Purva Phalguni lends moral idealism and philosophical pleasure. It turns love into a path of higher learning or cultural refinement. When well supported, Jupiter here gives the native a refined taste in art, music, and companionship, elevating pleasure to wisdom. But when afflicted or placed in a dashtana, Jupiter in this nakshatra may lean toward moral laxity, spiritual materialism, or over-idealizing love and comfort, leading to imbalance between discipline and indulgence. Mars in Purva Phalguni brings passionate assertiveness in romance, creativity, and self-expression. Well-placed Mars gives energy to pursue artistic goals, sexual confidence, or leadership in luxury industries. However, Mars's aggression contrasts with Venus's softness. So when afflicted or out of balance, this placement may cause dominance in relationships, sexual impulsiveness, or vanity-driven competitiveness, often camouflaged under artistic or social refinement. Saturn in Purva Phalguni provides restraint to this otherwise pleasure-driven nakshatra. In strength, it grants dignity, responsibility in relationships, and creative discipline. Artists, event planners, or social leaders with Saturn here tend to build long-term success through patience and structure. However, if Saturn is afflicted or poorly placed, the native may experience loneliness in love, sexual repression, or feel emotionally undeserving of comfort and admiration, often retreating behind a social mask. Rahu in Purva Phalguni inflates desire for fame, romance, or sensual gratification. In positive contexts, such as placements supported by Venus or Jupiter, this Rahu creates magnetic performers, seductive influencers, or unorthodox artists who challenge societal standards with style. Yet, when afflicted, Rahu's distortion in this nakshatra leads to compulsive romantic pursuits, obsessive need for attention, or downfall through luxury addiction and overindulgence. Ketu in Purva Phalguni draws the native inward, away from sensuality and glamour. While the world may perceive them as charismatic, internally they may be detached from the very pleasures they evoke. When Ketu is well placed, this results in spiritual artists, detached lovers, or minimalists who express beauty without attachment. If afflicted, however, it may create emotional confusion, withdrawal from intimacy, or difficulty enjoying life's pleasures due to karmic detachment. Mercury in Purva Phalguni brings artistic intelligence, playful speech, and flair in communication. Supported by benefics, Mercury here produces witty writers, actors, or public figures skilled at using language, humor, and charm to captivate. When afflicted, Mercury in this nakshatra may become gossipy, manipulative in relationships, or overly fixated on appearance and social theatrics, losing depth behind polished presentation. Interpretation of Purva Phalguni Nakshatra, house placement context. When Venus, the ruler of Purva Phalguni Nakshatra, is placed in a Kendra 1st, 4th, 7th, 10th, or Kona 1st, 5th, 9th, the creative, romantic, and self-expressive energies of this nakshatra bloom with elegance and authority. For example, for Leo ascendant, if Venus rules the 3rd and 10th houses and is placed in the 5th house, and Moon is in Purva Phalguni, the native becomes a magnetic, artistic force, someone whose charm, creativity, and stage presence elevate them in roles related to media, entertainment, or performance. The 5th house empowers Purva Phalguni's flair through expressive intelligence and romance. If Mercury is placed in Purva Phalguni and rules the 2nd and 11th houses for Virgo ascendant, and is positioned in the 1st house, Kendra, the native becomes a persuasive communicator who radiates charm and sensual confidence. Mercury lends clever articulation to Purva Phalguni's Venusian aesthetics, often creating public figures, spokespersons, or counselors skilled at connecting with others through appearance, voice, and social rapport. When the lord of a Purva Phalguni placed planet is located in Dushtana houses, 6th, 8th, or 12th, the pleasures and harmony associated with this nakshatra may encounter karmic obstacles or emotional imbalance. For instance, if Venus is in Purva Phalguni for a Scorpio ascendant, ruling the 7th and 12th houses, and is placed in the 8th house, the native may experience complex, transformative, or secretive romantic entanglements. Emotional intimacy may be tested through betrayal, intense passion, or spiritual detachment, requiring inner evolution to handle love wisely. Now consider Jupiter in Purva Phalguni for Aquarius ascendant, ruling the 2nd and 11th houses, and placed in the 9th house, Kona. This placement fuses prosperity, learning, and artistic values. The native channels Maga's nobility into dharmic teaching, luxurious living rooted in ethics, or creative entrepreneurship that aligns with higher principles. Jupiter supports expansive generosity, cultural sophistication, and strong belief in preserving aesthetic or family legacy. If Mars is in Purva Phalguni and rules the 5th and 10th houses for Sagittarius ascendant and is placed in the 4th house, Kendra, the native expresses protective, passionate energy at home, especially in artistic or emotional domains. Mars energizes the Venus-ruled Nakshatra with bold confidence. If well placed, the person may lead cultural foundations, design institutions, or actively protect loved ones with devotion. If afflicted, it may trigger domestic conflicts, ego clashes in love, or a demanding attitude toward emotional fulfillment. Suppose Saturn is in Purva Phalguni and rules the 6th and 7th houses for Cancer ascendant and is placed in the 12th house. The native may struggle with intimacy, retreat from public affection, or experience karmic delays in love and pleasure. This placement often signifies self-worth challenges, emotional coldness, or detachment from sensual enjoyment. Yet, if Saturn is supported by Jupiter or Venus, it creates a renunciate artist, someone who quietly excels in aesthetic realms without craving validation. If Rahu is in Purva Phalguni for Taurus ascendant and Venus, its nakshatra lord, is placed in the third house, the native becomes a seductive communicator, artist, or social figure who gains fame through voice, speech, or persuasive expression. Rahu amplifies Venusian magnetism in a way that makes the person crave attention, admiration, and creative independence. If afflicted, this can turn into manipulative charm or overindulgence. If well supported, it creates bold creatives, influencers, or performers. Lastly, if the moon is in Purva Phalguni for Aries ascendant and rules the fourth house, placed in the seventh house, the native seeks emotionally satisfying and aesthetically beautiful partnerships. The seventh house brings Purva Phalguni's sensual, romantic tendencies to life through deep interpersonal bonds. The individual may attract romantic partners who embody Venusian traits, charming, affectionate, but also proud. If the moon is afflicted, there may be possessiveness or excessive emotional dependence in relationships, often requiring inner balance to maintain harmony.